Okay, go ahead.
Hello, my name is Casper Niebe. I live in Copenhagen, Denmark. I am 42 years old, married, have a daughter, and I discovered crypto in mid 2016. I think it was. I read an article about Bitcoin at that time, and was fascinated really to see to see that some of these opportunities were the same as back when the internet was introduced. The ability to share information and copy information was a revolution when the internet was discovered or became broadly available to people. And I saw a lot of the same characteristics in crypto, really, because going from an era where you could share and copy and duplicate information, you had this unique feature where you could actually prevent duplication. And that was something that completely blew me away. And I immediately knew that this was a significant invention. So I started reading a lot about it. I've always been curious. I got my first computer when I was 7 years old, a Commodore 64. Uh, Actually, I still have it and use it from time to time. And so I've always been really interested in IT and computers in general. So having read a lot about Bitcoin, and at the time also a lot of other various cryptocurrencies, I realized that this has a massive potential. And of course, there was this huge bubble in 2017, and it was interesting to say the least. But also, I had this feeling that it was somehow not being used to its full potential. And we have seen various use cases, the distributed autonomous organizations popping up everywhere, and generally the technology is being put to use. It was as if there was a solution to a problem that didn't yet exist.
Mm-hmm.
And it's as if we are gradually starting to see the problems being created now that distributed ledger technology actually can provide solutions to. So I got involved with a crypto project called Byteball at the time.
Mm-hmm.
They had introduced an entirely new approach. They removed the blocks and the miners, and instead used a directed acyclic graph. You've heard about IOTA, Nano, Hashgraph, etc. They all use different kind of they have the same potential, but they do it in a different way, where you don't have any intermediaries. When I want to transact, I don't have to go through miners to have them include my transaction. And with Byteball, when I read the white paper, I was immediately intrigued by the openness, where every user is allowed to transact on the ledger completely free without having to pay a fee to a miner. So particularly the fees is what I see as a problem to achieve adoption, particularly in poorer countries. When you have these massive surges in price, you have a lot of transactions, and it causes the transaction fees to rise significantly. And we saw it recently here during the the Bloody Thursday, where a lot of Ethereum or DAG contracts were under collateralized and expired, and people were able to buy them for free because they simply paid a very high fee to get that transaction through. And it pretty much shows exactly what the problem with the fees are or is. It pretty much prevents the poorest from benefiting from this technology, because they wouldn't be able to pay, say, $40, $50 in fees to get a transaction through on a network. And that's where I saw Byteball, which is now called Obyte, had an advantage over the others, because there will be no fee market, there are no miners, and therefore the fees will remain low. It's a fixed fee. Basically, you pay for the amount of data that you add to the distributed ledger. So in my view, distributed ledgers has to be inclusive, and particularly in the underbanked and unbanked regions of the world, where cryptocurrencies actually could play a significant role, they automatically get prevented from using it due to these fees. So I started working with Byteball, and helped out with the translation for the wallet, and immediately got caught into doing all sorts of other stuff. And one of the things I did was I created you all know these hackathons, and in Byteball you had all these features already in place, so there wasn't actually a need to add more features. What was more needed was to find use cases. As I mentioned, we have a lot of solutions to non-existing problems. So I thought to myself, how can we encourage discovery of these problems to which we have solutions? And through my translation efforts, I was in contact with students from a university in Venezuela. Mm-hmm. And I decided to host a usathon, simply to allow teams of students to come up with potential use cases that could benefit their local communities. How can you apply distributed ledger technology and value transfer in your local communities? What kind of use cases are relevant to local communities? Because I live in Denmark. It's a relatively safe and wealthy country, and I have all the opportunities in the world right at hand. So there's no way I'm going to predict how things are on the ground in Caracas, Venezuela. We have this massive political problem in Venezuela going on, and I hear a lot of talk about using crypto and to bank the unbanked, and while it's a noble goal, it's just not possible to the poorest. If you're on the brink of starvation, and you sit there with a smartphone in your hand, the first thing you do was to sell your smartphone to buy food.
Right.
So by banking the unbanked, you would first need to devise the undevised and to connect the unconnected, and there's a long way before that can happen. And I totally agree that it will eventually reach a situation where you would have smartphones in the hands of even poor people. Mm-hmm. You also need infrastructure. You need paid mobile subscriptions and stuff like that with data plans. So one of the things that became painstakingly clear to me was that in order for the poorest people to actually benefit from the features that distributed ledgers introduce, you would need a way to let people without wallets, without devices, to benefit from this technology. Right. And that of course eliminates the potential of or the possibility to simply send money to the poor people. So I thought
I do want to push back. I do want to push back a little bit. I want to ask you a couple questions about your model, because I agree with everything that you're working on from an intentionality perspective, but I do disagree with, I guess, your economic model, because to a certain extent, I mean, I view transaction fees as something that could be unimaginably beneficial for solving quite a few problems. For example, you know, putting a, let's call it a gratuity. Let's say that it was a tip for society. Let's just call it that instead of a fee, because nobody likes fees.
An incentive to secure the network, so to speak.
Well, you know, I see it more as, you know, if everybody paid, let's say, a minimum suggested 10% transaction fee, those fees could be reallocated to all the other users who also use that particular currency or that medium of exchange, and that could create sort of a UBI.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
in an economy that uses that kind of a model, every corporation instantly becomes a public good, right? Like if Amazon
absolutely.
Amazon is selling $1 trillion a year and society is getting at least 10% of every single one of those transactions, we basically just socialized everything.
But you would run into a problem by deciding who is society. Why? I mean, you would need a way for these 10% to end up in what you and I would consider the society.
Yeah,
And
yeah. So what I envision, and again, I'm not an engineer, and there's many ways that you can solve this problem. I guess Apple could probably solve it with a fairly secure Face ID system, but you know, even that could be gamed. But basically, from an engineering perspective, the issue that we're trying to solve is the unique identity of each user. Because
yeah,
what prevents one user from setting up 1 billion accounts and getting 1 billion times the UBI, for example, right?
yeah, yeah.
So what I imagined, and you know, again, I'm sure there's myriads of different solutions for this, but I kind of had one in mind, um, that I think could also sort of double as a way of actually creating social bonds around this
Yeah,
currency.
yeah,
And basically it would be to make people play like 36 questions or something like that, right?
yeah.
Basically just let's do a two-way video interview live on the fly, and let's see if you can deep fake me live
Yeah.
talking to you on the fly, right?
hmm
And
hmm
if people sort of just verified their unique identities
hmm
by doing video interviews with each other 150 times, or you know,
hmm
whatever some dumb bar number is, to 250 or 150, somewhere in that range, you could create, number one, a little community,
hmm
and you could also you know, be receiving a UBI that you can use in that network.
Yeah.
So I think that from an engineering perspective, that's one way to do it. That's you know, got a lot
It's
of knock-on effects.
it's definitely an interesting approach, and a valid approach, I would say.
And
Uh,
the other advantage also, that I see here with this 10% transaction fee is that setting a minimum of 10% transaction fees on any transaction
mhm.
would effectively end basically volatility in any market.
But
So
you would
if you,
still you still have to look at at some of the existing solutions that crypto poses a competitive uh, solution to, like Visa, Mastercard,
right,
uh, and they charge fees. Of course, we all know that those fees end up in the pockets of the owners or shareholders, and at the end of the day, I believe that the percentage, the fee that you pay to make a transaction, that is what matters to you. You would have a lot of people looking at their $10 saying, okay, I want to send $10 from me to you. I don't want you to receive the $9 because I have to pay 10% to someone I don't know. It could be Amazon, it could be Google, it could be Visa or MasterCard. Whoever gets those funds, that isn't really interesting to me. I actually wanted you to have $10.
but the you know, I again, not to push back,
Mhm,
the solution that you're trying to, the problem that you're trying to solve here is remittance,
mhm,
right? You're saying there's, let's say, someone from India or China comes to America and works as an engineer and sends money home to their families, right? So you don't want Western Union to appropriate that person's money. But what I'm saying is, what if everyone in that Indian person's family in India was making a UBI of $2,000 a month or whatever it is, and then there was no need for remittance to begin with?
That's true, and that's actually one of the potentials that distributed ledger technology introduces. It has the potential to even out the differences in wealth in the entire world. Right now, you will see crypto being used, huge flows of crypto going from wealthy countries to poorer countries, particularly with Venezuela, where you have these embargoes where basically their entire banking system is completely shut off from the rest of the world. You can't make a transaction from the outside world to a bank account in Venezuela. So you would have to go through all sort of illicit markets and stuff like that.
Right.
And I think that's really important, that you start to see, because it's totally possible to do it with crypto. So you start to see the inflow of crypto into the poorer nations, and you get a far more even spread of wealth throughout the entire world. And I know, living in one of the the wealthier countries in the world, it of course means that I will get less. Sooner or later, eventually.
I disagree with that as well. I'm not sure. I'm not sure why. I think that if we have a global economy where 8 billion people are empowered to participate, we simply create a much larger market.
Yeah, but you see it in terms of value only. You have to see it in terms of buying power. All that value you hold represents a power to buy stuff. And when there's only this much stuff in the world to be bought, spreading out the currencies will automatically mean that prices will also start evening out throughout the entire world. Because if you suddenly inject a large sum of money into a local community, you will start to see prices rise in that specific location, because people are willing to pay more.
But so, it might also, you know, not to be too contrarian, but it might also have the opposite effect, because, for example, if you have markets that are rife with speculation, like, for example, real estate and stock, right?
Yeah.
So you have a lot of people, for example, in Canada, you have Toronto and Vancouver, where there's and I remember I used to live in Shanghai, and everywhere else, any major metropolitan area has this problem where you have a lot of people that are speculating on the value of downtown real estate, and therefore you have a lot of downtown real estate that is unoccupied. Nobody's living in it.
Yeah.
But it costs, you can't buy it. You can't buy it, you can't live in it. Right?
Yeah, it's being basically used for speculation purposes only.
So what if it costs 10% gratuity to buy an apartment?
That would just increase the price by 10%, I think.
Well, in the short run, yes.
Yeah.
But in the long run, you take all of the speculators out of the market, which reduces liquidity for that particular market, sure.
Absolutely, yeah.
But the overall liquidity of the world market with a UBI is quite sufficient, I think.
You might be right. You might be. I think it's highly difficult to actually predict what would happen if we were to see a scenario like that. But it's an intriguing thought, really. I'm not sure I agree totally with all the different points you're making.
I propose possibilities. I don't have any
data
in front of me that says that real estate prices would go down if you put a 10% transaction fee on all of those transactions. To me, it seems obvious that it would, because everyone's always saying the reason why prices are so high is because of speculation. And when you read, like Flash Boys, or you understand a little bit about high frequency trading and how just generally speculation works in the stock market, it's not an issue, right? But nobody would be doing high frequency trading if stock trades cost 10% each.
Oh, that's definitely, that's sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where, we can, it will eliminate some liquidity, but
it would be difficult because you would have to impose those 10% on all transactions. And I think that you and I would agree that some transactions were better than others, so to speak. And that's definitely not possible. In a fully distributed ledger, you would have to consider all transactions equal. Otherwise, it wouldn't be an open distributed ledger.
I agree. I
And
agree. There's too many loopholes that would be created if you said, "Oh no, if it's a charitable donation, right?"
yeah, exactly,
Then everything would become a charitable donation, for example.
exactly.
So from an engineering perspective, it has to be a flat 10% fee, and that's not necessarily the most socially just thing to do, but it's just what has to be done from an engineering perspective in order to get it to work.
Yeah, it would be the only implementable way, basically.
Yes.
You wouldn't be able to tell which transactions were good and which were bad.
Exactly.
You can just look at the tax systems where they try to introduce various taxes on luxury goods or stuff like that, and it's painstakingly obvious that it just doesn't work. There's tons of loopholes everywhere, and it becomes a huge mess. And one thing that is always the result of such complicated and complex systems is that the poor and the undereducated, they get cut off. Basically, they will be the ones paying the most. Those understanding the system, knowing how to game the system, will be the ones benefiting from it. And I think you would see the same with a flat 10% fee on transactions on a distributed ledger as well, because you would see the smart people finding ways to bundle transactions so that you could, instead of making 10 smaller transactions, you would create a tab at the store where you buy your goods, and then just pay at the end of the month to prevent smaller fees all the time.
But it doesn't matter, because ultimately, I mean,
the 10% fee is a 10% fee, of course.
Exactly.
But still, you would I think find ways that things got gamed one way or the other.
Of course, things would get gamed, but I mean, things get gamed in any system. Things get gamed in Bitcoin. Things get gamed in Ethereum, and the largest, the greatest, the most popular currency for money laundering is U.S. dollars.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So money laundering was not invented in 2009 with the publication of or the launch of the first version of Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. There was money laundering before that. There will be people finding edge cases in every system until the end of time.
Yeah.
But that doesn't But that doesn't mean that we can't think of, like, if I have this idea, I have this theory that if we build this system, we can solve 80% of the world's problems. But then we'll still have 20% of the problems left. So I guess we better not do it.
No.
No. That's just,
it's always worth it. It's basically about saving lives.
Yes.
And if your model will save just one life, most will say it's worth it. So it all comes down to whether your model works or not. Of course, it would be a huge experiment.
The issue is, like I speak to a lot of people in the community, and many of us agree. A lot of people are just speculators and not really working on any particular mission. But a lot of the people that are involved in the crypto space, they see transactions, or even something as sacrilegious as taxes, as being the most horrible thing imaginable.
Yeah.
But me personally, like if I'm paying taxes and that money is going towards dropping, you know, a bomb on some poor people, I don't really want to pay those taxes.
Yeah, of course.
Right? But if I'm paying a 10% transaction fee, and that transaction fee is being cut up into billions of parts and being shared with the whole network of the people using the same medium of exchange as me, I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's not really a tax. That's just me being grateful that humanity exists.
But wouldn't you create a situation where you would actually encourage not transacting?
Yes, yes.
To simply receive fees from people transacting on the network. If I just sit back and wait, I would receive my share of everyone else's 10% fees. Is that
Right?
the model
You would receive your UBI.
Yeah, yeah,
Which is a basic amount.
yeah.
And what you're saying is, if you found a way to live in the woods and not spend that very basic amount of money for 20 years, then you'd be rich. And I say, well, hey, that's a great plan. You know, if you can be that efficient with your finances, wonderful.
But I think we are still in a situation where a lot of these thoughts are basically just castles in the skies.
Yes.
We have to figure out ways to pave the roads to those castles,
Yes.
and introducing models that discourages transacting would definitely make that road to that castle a lot longer, I think.
Well, no, because I mean, okay, I don't want to say no. There is a counter argument that reducing the incentive for transactions as much as possible also kind of helps you to minimize the need for solving scalability issues. Right? And
that's true.
Another thing, if people have less of an incentive to consume, just because we live in a society where arbitrary consumption is no longer an exciting prospect, well, then we're just ripping resources out of the Earth's surface at a slower rate.
Yeah.
That doesn't, I don't view any of those outcomes as being particularly problematic, right? If we're saying here's a UBI and you can spend it, of course you can spend it, but you don't have to, right?
Yeah, definitely. And if there was a way to ensure that each person only had one wallet, that would definitely be a great solution. It would basically be a universal flat tax that everyone had to pay in order to basically help even out wealth in the entire society, reduce overconsumption, and a lot of other beneficial factors as well. But I think it would, from a from a from an implementation point of view, it would probably be a nightmare. I think there would eventually end up being. I do like the thought, though. I have to say, but I think it would be very difficult, and probably people would figure out ways to game the system that you and I can't see right now.
Yeah, of course they would figure out ways to game the system, and then, you know, worst case scenario, the V1 would fail, and then, you know, there would have to be a V2 implementation, or you know, but
it's the same we see with fiat currencies. Basically, they fail from time to time as well.
Exactly, they fail all the time. You know, any system can fail, but the question that I'm asking is, what if it worked? Because from an engineering perspective, you have to solve the unique identity problem, right? And I feel like there's definitely some solutions for that. And you have to solve, but you know, just adding an arbitrary fee in the client side software is trivial from a software development perspective.
Yeah, definitely.
So just saying, okay, every transaction has a minimum fee of 10%. And a maximum fee of you know, whatever percentage you enter into this box. You know, I think that's not actually hard to implement. The only thing, like, it's the unique identity.
To figure out where those 10% should go, once they leave your wallet. That's when
But everybody.
that's when that's when the problem starts, because you would create with each transaction you would have to create a transaction to each user in the entire network. It would be, you would definitely need a solution that could scale massively, because you would have to distribute it immediately in order not to introduce an escrow of some kind where all people's 10% landed first. So I see some some implementation difficulties, at least.
Yeah,
Not
I
saying
mean,
it can't be solved, but just at the face of it, it would seem that you would have to create with every transaction that you send a transaction to each of the other users in the entire network.
yes. Well, I mean, that would be one way to do it. That would be very memory intensive. But
Yeah.
I'm sure that there's ways to kind of, prune batch transactions. There's probably a way of just sending the 10% transaction fee to, a set address that goes to those fees, and all funds that are sent to that address are
Hmm.
just divided equally and sent to all addresses in the network without actually logging a transaction. You can implement rules
Hmm.
in the blockchain of your currency that kind of sidestep that
Or you could actually just have your wallet monitor the ledger,
right.
and every time someone made a transaction, they would calculate their share of 10% of that transaction and increase their own balance by that. But you would still need a way for one user to figure out how many users are there in the entire network at any given point in time.
Yes.
Without introducing intermediaries or escrows or basically centralized entities, I think it would be quite a difficult task to solve. I'm not a blockchain developer myself. I
Well,
do make
again,
so.
I also want to push back on the intermediaries solving the problem, because, and I don't know if this is true, but I'm sure that this is true in some countries. But
Mhm.
I once heard that in Canada there are twice as many social insurance numbers as there are Canadians.
Okay.
Okay, so basically, like, what you're saying is the solution to the unique identity problem is a government issue birth certificate, for example.
Mm.
And I'm not sure that that is necessarily the most secure system either.
No, and you have several countries where you don't even have any government issued identity papers at all. You don't
Right.
have social security numbers or anything that can uniquely identify a person. So in those cases, you see it in Syria with refugees, where they use iris scans
Yes.
in refugee camps to make sure that each family gets their share of food and doesn't collect more than once a day or something like that. Definitely to introduce, and that's actually an interesting aspect of distributed ledgers. All the solutions that we create will have to work globally.
Mhm.
So whenever we find a solution that works in our own backyard, once it hits the reality in poorer countries, there's always all sorts of troubles that we didn't foresee.
Mhm.
And 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 that's the time we're in right now, is basically figuring out those solutions that can work globally,
Right.
because the currencies work globally. So in order to introduce use cases, they would have to work globally as well,
Mhm.
and be equally interesting to a global community rather than a region or a country. So it's really an interesting time we're in right now, seeing a far more globalized world. Um, and we see it in the Western world where we travel. I can go to London for, yeah, I don't know, 50, 50 euros or something like that.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's ridiculously cheap. And we all transact, we buy online, stuff gets shipped all around the world. So we have to consider solutions that are global and not just country by country. And in that sense, the entire idea of a country's government is potentially not going to work in a
Right.
globalized world. So you would have a uh, global government if and that's for sure. You could just look at countries right now. They can't even make it work inside a single country. There's
Yeah.
no way it would work globally. So it's really some interesting times we're headed into.
I do want to talk to you about these directed acyclic graphs that you used for Byteball and currencies
Mhm.
like IOTA, because that's a very interesting technology. I'll let you contrast it to traditional blockchain or 2009 blockchain technology, in the sense that in the blockchain everything has to be stored and everyone has to keep a copy of every single transaction on
Mhm.
layer one, which is the base layer, the public layer, where everybody has a consistent view of history of all of the
Exactly.
transactions that ever took place. So
And
in a regular blockchain, everybody has a complete record of history of every transaction. How
ever
does it
made.
work?
Yeah.
Yes. How does it work with DAG technology? And like, that's very interesting. And how does the DAG approach that, and why is DAG potentially so much more scalable than Bitcoin?
Uh, First off, you can't really say DAG technology. DAG is just a data structure, basically.
Right, right.
So you cannot really compare each of the non-blockchains project to one another. Um, IOTA has one way to do it. Nano has a different way to do it. They have this block lattice where you have each user have their own little blockchain, and they transact on this block lattice, which is basically a graph instead of a block containing transactions. With Obyte, you have basically the same as you have with Bitcoin. Every full node will have eventually all transactions that ever occurred on the network. So all full nodes, just like on the Bitcoin blockchain, will need to know all transactions ever to have taken place on the ledger.
Mm.
Uh, what is basically different, and I can only describe Obyte in details because that's the one I know the best. And the way it's done is basically that instead of linking blocks to one another, you just link transactions to one another. You don't have to wait for 10 minutes to fill up a block of transactions and then post that block and link it to the other. You can link transactions to other transactions. And that's the basic principle. That's where pretty much all DAG-based projects at least have some similarities. And as soon as we start talking about consensus algorithm and spam prevention and stuff like that, you get a completely different picture. Every project has a different approach on how to do that. Um, on Obyte, everyone are allowed to transact. If you have a full node, you create a transaction, and that is immediately registered in the network. It gets distributed to all other full nodes
Mhm.
eventually, and it basically just gets connected in this graph. And in order for the graph not to grow into different, because if side chains or sides of different branches of the DAG structure, if they get too far apart, uh, the further they get apart, the larger the risk of double spends will be.
Mm.
So you need a way to figure out when and if a double spend occurs. And that's where things on DAGs get a lot more complicated than they do on blockchains.
Mm.
Um, on uh, on some of the DAGs, they have a centralized entity figuring out which transactions are good and which are not. Obyte, they don't have that. All full nodes are able to establish complete order of transactions. So by establishing a complete order, which transaction came before another, then you can actually solve double spends. And the way it's solved is that on the network there are full nodes that post transactions at a regular frequency. They just post it into the network and they create sort of a main chain. And by looking at that, when I make a transaction, I post it into the DAG and I specify which 12 order providers I want to use. So once my transaction has been referenced either directly or indirectly by one of those 12 addresses or transactions from one of those 12 addresses, then my transaction becomes stable, basically. But it's not, they don't have any way to censor the network. So apart, if you compare it to IOTA, for example, where they have the coordinator to select tips, help full nodes select the open tips. You don't have that mechanism on Obyte. You'd simply post it, and even if I created a double spend, both those transactions will remain in the network, and both are there. They both happened. They, of course, didn't happen at the same time, so they will be arranged in a way that establishes perfect order, and the one that comes first of the two will be the good one, and the one that came last will be the bad one. So that won't be accepted by full nodes in the network, but it will still be there. And other users are perfectly fine if they reference that. It's not that it gets unreferenced or something like that. It simply stays there, but in the protocol, it's able to figure out, oh, this is a bad transaction, but it stays there because it's needed to buy. If you pick out a transaction, you would break the entire graph. So there's no censorship possible at all in Obyte. And that's one of the interesting things. It's open for everyone to transact, and it's completely censorship resistant. So it's at least in my view, it doesn't provide zero fees, and it doesn't provide huge transactions per second that some of these projects usually boast about. But it's a more realistic and a more open solution, basically, in my view.
Right.
So I think the current transaction per second rate is about 35, which is when the network starts. It's not the nodes in themselves, but the network will start to have difficulties. It will catch up, so you can have bursts of many thousand transactions per second, but the nodes will then use some time to catch up. So for the time being, right now the main bottleneck is actually on the database performing these reorderings of transactions that has to occur continuously until they eventually become stable. And once they become stable, that's another rather interesting feature of Obyte. They are it has deterministic finality. So you cannot change it. You cannot have reorgs. You cannot have censorship or anything. Once it becomes stable, it's stable. And particularly in financial use cases, that's a desirable way. You wouldn't have these risks of chargebacks, so to speak,
right.
because that causes all sorts of trouble. And that's the reason you have to wait for so long for on most blockchains, because you need to be relatively sure that you won't see a reorganization of the blocks.
Yeah, but basically what I've understood from you, and you know, many other people that I've talked to about you know, DAG based coins, in order to have a full and consistent view of history with the network, you have to be a supernode, which means you have to have a record of all transactions.
Correct.
So, you know, and that really is the point of participating in blockchains. I mean, for the lay person that doesn't understand the technology, I suppose a light client is fine.
Yeah,
And,
yeah, yeah.
you know, even for me, I mean, I often, you know,
For normal use cases, it's
yeah,
perfectly fine to have a light client. Yeah.
yeah. And, you know, but I personally, I'm a stickler for the philosophy of the technology, which is the whole point is that I'm not just taking your word for it, you
Mm-hmm.
know, like
Yeah.
for example, when I'm watching YouTube, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and I see, oh, this video was posted on August 4th,
Mm-hmm.
whatever, 2019. That metadata is provided to me by YouTube and not
Yeah.
by any other party verifying, right? So YouTube can say, oh, this video was posted on this date, but actually it was posted 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so
It's the basic verify, don't trust.
exactly,
Yeah.
it's a trustless system.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, you know, for anybody that wants to be a participant in a trustless system,
Mm-hmm.
they still have to store a complete history of all transactions no matter what.
Yeah.
So then
They can either verify or they can choose to trust
right,
and use a light client. It's basically the same.
right,
But the main difference is that you have the opportunity to verify. You don't
yes,
have to trust. Uh,
yes, yes,
so, but for the vast majority, of course, you would see that they would just trust, and from particularly from mobile wallets, you wouldn't be able to store a full. Well, actually, you would, but it wouldn't perform really good
right.
on a smartphone.
So then that leads, you know, me into the, I guess, the whole scalability discussion, because
Mm-hmm.
from what I understand, you know, the way to scale
Mm-hmm.
is to do a few things, right? There's a few solutions, and there's some religious camps that are
Mm-hmm.
in each group. You know, we have to increase the block size.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
have
yeah.
to double the block size. We have to make a dynamic block size. We have to allow for terabyte block sizes.
Yeah.
You know, there's the block size people that want a really big block.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's other people, I guess, sort of like in the nimble wimble type
Yeah.
camp. You know, what they want to do is they want to reduce the size of the transactions,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Basically, they use very complicated mathematics to
Mm-hmm.
make the transactions even more private on layer one
Mm-hmm.
by abstracting away what wallet addresses were used.
Yeah.
And, you know, in doing so, they also make the storage requirement a lot smaller. So reducing the
Yes.
size of the transactions, increasing the storage capacity of the network.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody has to buy more hard drives, and maybe some people can't afford to.
Yeah.
Then another option is sharding, which I think one of the biggest projects that is working on sharding would be Ethereum.
Yes.
So basically just taking your whole database and looking at it like a pizza
Yeah.
and cutting it into pieces so that everybody just holds a piece of the database. And, you know, let's say there's a record that starts with A. Well, there's, you know, maybe some people that hold all the records that start with A, and another
Mm-hmm.
10,000 people that hold all the records that start with B. And then everybody's only hosting a small fraction of the total data set. So
Yeah.
those are the different camps and the different approaches. I'm not sure why so many people are only interested in one of these potential solutions and
Yeah.
not the other ones. Not Lightning
Yeah.
Network. The Lightning Network, that's for retards. Any layer 2 solution, oh no. I don't
Yeah. Yeah.
understand. I don't necessarily understand, because that's another thing is layer 2 solutions, right? Like Lightning
Yeah.
Network,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
which is
Because
basic.
there's potential in each of those solutions,
Yes.
and you could actually benefit from the potential of all the solutions
Mm-hmm.
at once. Of course, you would get a significant increase in complexity,
Mm-hmm.
both to those running the nodes and to users probably on the network as well.
Mm-hmm.
You would have to introduce a lot of complexity, and we are dealing with multi-billion-dollar projects for the most part,
Right.
and it's basically changing wheels on a F1 racer during without going into the pit. It's really small, tiny steps at a time in order not to crash into something.
What solutions in terms of, you know, scalability solutions, is there anything on the horizon that you're particularly excited about? Is there any of these things that I mentioned earlier? Like I honestly, I really don't understand the people who hate Lightning.
No, no. I
I
think
There
second
are
layer
some people that
solutions are.
really hate Lightning, and I don't get that. But you know, what is your thoughts on this?
I think once you start opening up the potential for IoT use cases, you would see these massive amount of transactions going through your network. And
Mhm.
if you aren't able to isolate those or to abstract them away from either layer one or to prevent them from mitigate throughout the entire network, then you would completely drown your system. It wouldn't be able to scale. So layer two solutions is of course needed, in my view at least. And the sharding thought is interesting as well. Um, I think that to some extent, some of the logic used in the DAG projects might be of inspiration to those working on the different sharding techniques, because it's basically some of the logic that has to be put into the system is already implemented by the DAG based structures.
Mm.
So it's I don't think there's a one size fits all. You would have to introduce solutions that would fit a specific use case, and therefore, as you say, I think that the solution would be multiple solutions, and you could even have a project where you had some parts of the network running sharding, other parts of the network with a layer two mechanism, and of course, it's always interesting to reduce the size of transactions, both in terms of bandwidth use, but also in terms of disk storage use.
Mm.
So there's benefits to all of these different techniques, and I don't see one as the winner takes all. Definitely not. So on this matter, I'm definitely on on your team here. I
Mm.
think there's no reason to cut off the benefits of other solutions just because you really like one of them.
Yeah, yeah. I just, you know, I was in a few one group in particular, which I think is a Bitcoin Cash community that you was when I was in that WeChat group, it was a Bitcoin group, and you know now it's a Bitcoin Cash group that just despises Lightning Network and wants bigger block sizes,
Yeah.
and yeah, there's a lot of hate in that group, and I don't understand it. I'm like, but you know, Lightning Network, I'm not saying I get there's problems. You have to have two hot wallets on both sides of the transaction. There's all kinds of technical issues, and I'm like, okay, I get it. But in an open ecosystem, I'm sure there's a use case for Lightning Network, and it should be allowed to exist if people want to work on an open source project that doesn't interfere with layer one. You know, like why do we have to hate it so much?
And if there are solutions to problems that arise, why not use them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why just say no because we decided not to? But why? I mean, if the solutions are out there for a specific purpose, if someone wants to introduce a layer two um, transaction possibility, let them. Why not?
Yeah,
It doesn't hurt me that someone would introduce layer two solutions. Um, I could even continue to transact on layer one if that's the only one I trust.
hmm hmm
I don't really see why there's so much hate going on between all these different. It's basic technology. It's not like it's religion, but it's definitely turning out to be some kind of religious fight between groups, and I think it's really a pity because
this technology, it's first off, it's so young. We haven't even started scratching the surface of the potential of it. We are so few people, relatively still so few people working on in this space. I don't, I can't really point to any other industry where you have this kind of rivalry in a very, very little industry. It's
Yes.
it's ridiculous, really, and we could benefit so much from working together, helping out, helping each other, instead of all this tribalism going on. But it, I
Well,
think it's in
I'll
part
tell you.
due to all the speculation.
I'll tell
Yeah.
you one of the issues that I see in the network. I heard this on a podcast a long time ago, some technology podcasts, but and also even some TED Talks that point out that layer one blockchains like Bitcoin are incredibly transparent, actually,
Hmm.
and they help for tracing transactions more than anything else. Like I was watching a TED Talk, some FBI agent that was talking about some. I think it might have been related to the Silk Road or some money that was traced back to some actual FBI agents
Yeah.
that were on the take, and they were able to find out about it because of Bitcoin. And there's this theory that maybe this transparent yet decentralized economic paradigm might have actually been invented by some people in the intelligence community.
Hmm.
And I mean, that's we don't
It's
it's not impossible. It's not impossible. Me personally, when I see a Bitcoin price ticker on mainstream media like CNBC,
yeah,
right, my immediate conclusion is, well, the powers that be tolerate Bitcoin, and I wonder why.
yeah,
And,
and
you
but
know
but but you also see all types of privacy focused projects that
yeah,
was spun off from the initial Bitcoin design.
yeah,
So either those who invented Bitcoin in order to provide Federal Bureau of Investigation a way to trace all transactions going on in the entire world. Either they weren't particularly visionary about what that technology would eventually be used for,
mhm.
or otherwise it's. I think the solution, the correct answer is that someone else, someone outside surveillance industry introduced
No,
Bitcoin.
but I agree with you. It's a possibility that it was invented by a group of cyberpunk hackers as well. We
Hmm.
don't know. I don't know who invented it, and I'm not particularly concerned. But when I look at the animosity
Hmm.
between Bitcoin Cash, and Bitcoin Satoshi's vision,
Hmm.
when I look at the amount of hatred that I'm getting from these people, it seems like some high school bullshit. It
Yeah.
seems like maybe these people are on different teams at the same company or something. There's
Yeah.
you know what I mean? There's something going on there that, I mean, the level of hatred between these camps has not been explained to me. I just don't know why these people hate each other so much.
One of the things, and I work with the as a leader and have a diploma in leadership as well. One thing that happens when people communicate online through text is that a lot of things get misunderstood. You have a global community of people where not everyone speaks equally well English,
Right.
which is usually so. So you will have all sorts of misunderstandings and misinterpretations going on, and you automatically um, you put your own emotions into you read your own emotions into what others write to you, and things become highly emotional, and where money is involved, emotions are always high, and it just takes a very, very small misunderstanding to get emotions to explode. Particularly when you have these bear markets where people are frustrated and they thought they were going to be able to buy a new house or a Lamborghini or whatever, and then you have this massive build up of frustration in entire communities, and eventually you will have these people ticking off each other. It's just a powder keg waiting for a match.
Yeah. No, I guess just, from my perspective, what I observed that I found interesting in terms of this high school kind of mean girl sort of stuff going on is primarily, I guess, Craig Wright and Roger Ver, right?
Yeah.
And, these are two very, I've met Roger. He's a champion jujitsu martial artist. He's a very physically fit guy with a very short haircut who always wears a clean suit,
Yeah.
and he says he's an anarchist, but he has a very aggressive authoritarian type demeanor, I have to say.
Yeah.
And and the way that he's fighting with Craig Wright, these two individuals seem to be making decisions that are obviously against both of their financial interests, almost like they don't really give a shit because money's not an object for them.
Yeah.
That's just I observe a lot of irrational behavior that doesn't seem consistent with people who care about their bottom lines.
Yeah, and that's quite possibly because it's true. They might not care about their bottom lines.
Right.
They are they see themselves as working for a higher purpose. It's the purpose that is their goal. It's not to get rich. Them getting rich, doing so, it's just a positive side effect. But it's relatively common in particularly the tech industry, where you have these prima donna type people that and not in a negative sense. It's from the Italian word la prima donna, the opera singer standing in front on the stage. They are so dedicated to their art that they don't care how much they get paid. They don't care if the audience applaud them or anything. They just feel the art so much that they want to perform their best. And you see some of the same tendencies in software developers and these very highly specialized creative industries, because you have to watch to see software development as a creative art. You're basically building something that someone hasn't built before. So you are inventing stuff. You are creating art, and this creativity is almost always combined with some sort of determination to perform or to reach your higher goal. And I think it's also obvious that a lot of these things that is required to become a good blockchain developer or even a blockchain designer, um, those traits are often combined with some kind of diagnosis,
But I mean,
Asperger's, or
yeah,
you have a lot of these
I hear what you're saying, but I mean,
highly intelligent people.
I'm trying to put myself in the first person perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's imagine that, I'm one of these players in one of these camps, and I'm saying, okay, well, I bring to the table X number of developers and X amount of development resources, and I have X number of users in my camp of people who are following me. And so I can work against people that are building exactly what I'm building with a trivial architectural difference.
Yeah.
Or I can work with them. And what I observe is people that are fighting fights that are not really worth fighting, and they're hurting their developers and they're hurting their users.
Absolutely.
And
But
so that's why I'm not sure if it has anything to do with any artistic integrity or anything like that. It seems strange.
there's a fair share of narcissism as well. Uh,
Yes.
and that's probably, at least to some extent, what's going on in some of the different projects. But again, you're applying rational thoughts to basically or fundamentally irrational events. Uh,
Yes.
and both you and I can look at it and say this simply doesn't make sense. But I'm sure that if we were inside the head of any of these combatants, then it would make sense in some odd way or another. Um, I can't really say how it is or how it would make sense. But one thing that's for sure, when you have these highly talented people, there's a lot of money at stake, and there's a lot of miscommunication or communication difficulties, then you have a recipe for disaster. So
Yeah.
so it's I'm not surprised that we see all of this tribalism and things, people breaking out from one project to establish to create their own with, just as you say, it's a trivial change to the protocol. I mean, it's like they are generals in for an army. They kept say, "I'll take my community and developers and go over here and build exactly the same, only red this time," and it 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 doesn't actually make that much sense. And in my
It
view, there's a lot of talent and time being wasted on
yes.
stuff like that, instead of trying to break down boundaries. Say, let's go where no one has gone before.
Mhm.
Let's build stuff that no one has built before. Or let's take this castle in the sky, let's bring it down to earth. Say, what's it actually good for? I think that's what we really need at this point in time, because we
But
can't keep inventing new tools all the time.
you know, I agree with you, and it's just what I observe is the reason why I find it so peculiar
Mhm.
is that, you know, in another industry, let's say the television industry,
Mhm.
right? There isn't a battle between 4:3 and 16:9, and you know, Dolby surround versus another completely VHS versus beta, you know, all these different
Yeah.
formats. Like other industries seem to be able to send champions to one another's companies and, you know, work out some agreement on industry standards,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
ISO 9000 and whatnot. I mean, there seems to be in other industries adults,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
right?
I have to agree.
And and I'm wondering why there are none in the blockchain space, or fewer.
Few. Let's say few. There
Few
are some out there.
well-known ones. Few
Yeah.
well-known ones.
Yeah. But that's
It seems odd. It just seems like a very strange space.
yeah, and it is, and to some extent that's also what makes it so damn interesting.
Yes.
Uh, and it's basically a soap opera, watching and following what goes on, we saw we saw recently the escapades with the J.K. Rowling,
Yeah.
and people taking to Twitter with more or less luck. Um, it's really fun to watch how people act actually, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of irrationality, and there's a lot of high school fights going on basically.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Um,
just, you know, I wish that the industry could find a greater focus,
yeah,
because this technology is truly disruptive and could help a lot of unbanked people. You know,
absolutely, absolutely.
you and I maybe we have different economic models and different ideas on what the best protocols are, whatever, And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
maybe we actually agree at the end of the day on almost everything. Who knows? But both of us agree that this technology is most disruptive in dealing with abject poverty.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And you know, these bitter little bitch high school bullshit fights are quite disheartening in this context. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
because everybody's saying, you know, like everybody when they're coming into the industry, oh, you guys are just money launderers and hackers and nerds, and you're not doing anything.
Yeah, scammers.
Right. And everybody, their first response is always no, but we could help the unbanked people of the third world.
Yeah,
Okay, but you're not doing that. You're just fighting.
exactly.
You're
The
just,
first question should always be, so what are you doing to bank someone?
yeah.
I just bought some and sit back and wait for my Lambo.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just gonna hodl. I'm just gonna
Yeah,
buy some and hodl, and
yeah,
that's how I'm gonna help the poor people.
yeah,
Right. Yes.
yeah.
Okay.
And I think it's important that once you start actually working with these technologies and apply them to real world problems, then it becomes painstakingly obvious that the tool actually doesn't matter. If you have a family in Venezuela who cannot afford $20 worth of infant formula for their baby, who ends up dead because of $20 worth of infant formula, I don't give a rat's ass which kind of blockchain solution you use to transfer $20 down to that family so they can be able to save their baby.
Right.
I mean, once you get things into a real world perspective, a lot of what goes on in the blockchain industry, it becomes ridiculous. It's completely irrelevant to the potential that this technology holds.
Mm.
And whether you use one blockchain or another, or a DAG-based project or a block, it really doesn't matter as long as you solve the problem that you set out to solve. And that's where I think that we as an entire community have to mature and wake up, because we can't keep introducing more ways to speculate and basically play games with people's money, because that's what it's being used for. We have
Mhm.
all these, oh, well, you can leverage your investments, and you can, if that's what I wanted, I could go to the stock markets.
Yes.
It's already there. We're not disrupting anything. We're just inventing an additional way to do exactly the same, and that's that bothers me to some extent, really, that we have this massive potential. We have these tools to build amazing new things, and we waste it completely on greed and people. Yeah,
Yeah.
basically.
So listen, Casper,
Yeah,
this was a great conversation.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Can you tell me about your logo, the Polo Polo, and the logo behind you? I've noticed that it's quite
yeah,
prominent.
yeah.
Does it have any significance, or what does it mean?
Absolutely. It's a logo that I designed myself. Well, I described what I wanted to convey,
Mhm.
um, and it's basically three people. It's a donor, and it's an applicant, and it's a provider of a
Mhm.
physical product.
Mhm.
They are interlocked. They are surrounded by the big O for the mobile platform. So by the use of this distributed ledger technology, they can now interact with one another without the need for trust between any of the three different parties involved in a donation. So you have a donor that makes a donation to pay for a physical product that someone applied for, and in order for the funds to be released to the shop providing the product, the one who applied for the product will have to confirm receipt of that product. Once they confirm receipt, the funds will be released from the smart contract between the donor and the shop.
Mm.
And the beauty is that no that the donor has an incentive, because he wants to feel good about himself.
Mhm.
That's basically the main reason that people make a donation. The shop owner they will have an increased revenue, so they have an incentive to interact. And the applicant, they will get a product that they otherwise couldn't afford, so they have an incentive to fulfill their part of the agreement. And of course, they won't get the product unless they confirm receipt. So everyone has an incentive to act honestly and to basically fulfill their end of the bargain.
Right.
So the logo actually, that's at least what I wanted it to. It envisions the model, the three people locked together by a distributed ledger platform. So that's it.
Amazing. So where can people find you if they want to find you? Where can they find you?
They can go to polyopolio.org. They can find my contact details in there. There's an about page where they can see everyone on the team who's worked. We're not a funded project at all. We are 100% volunteers, so we don't receive any funding. And the model, of course, is that donors make donations directly to pay for a product at a merchant. So there's no cut we can take or anything. There's no potential profit to be made, and in that sense, I'm quite proud that we were able to gather this big a team of enthusiastic people working voluntarily on the project. Of course, it does mean that to some extent I would like the development of the platform to go a bit faster, but also none of us work full time on this project, though we probably spend enough hours to consider it a full-time job next to our normal full-time jobs. So people can, of course, visit polyopolio.org, find my contact details there. I'm also on LinkedIn, on Twitter. I'm sure you could post my name somewhere.
Casper, what is your last name?
Niebe, Niebe.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
I'm sure everyone, if you want to look for Casper, 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 and then Niebe, LinkedIn and polyopolio.org. I really appreciate your time today. I appreciate the work that you're doing, and I appreciate that it's voluntary. I think that's quite nice.
Yeah, thanks.
And I wish your project all the best.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure being on this talk with you.
Yes.
And the name Casper, it's actually like the friendly ghost. So
yes.
People should be familiar with the name Casper.
Exactly. I didn't want to say that, but that's what came to mind. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard it before.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'll speak to you soon. Yep.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.